so many documents and so many documents over and over again, and it was exhausting for many people in Puerto Rico. And we particularly saw an issue about ownership. And, property and land tenure and ownership is a sort of like a complex issue in Puerto Rico, and it's because so many things are involved, not only legal issues, but there's a social context to it as well, and poverty as well. And we have this unique legal framework in Puerto Rico that you can be an owner of a home by civil code. And our civil code is from Spanish descent when we were a colony of Spain. And that was a particular legal framework from the Stafford Act, which is federal law, and FEMA regulations. And it was very hard to convince FEMA why so many people in Puerto Rico are legal owners. They're not illegal, although I think nobody's illegal, but you hear that again all the time, that they were there legally, maybe informally, but they were legal there, and they were owners. So, it was very hard. It was a very hard process, with these two legal frameworks in conflict. So, I'm really thankful of what Kim said earlier, because, a lot of lawyers from other states were like, how can we help? How can we go to Puerto Rico and help? And I was like, listen, you can send, law students were such a great help, but also mentoring. We have so much great mentoring from folks in New Jersey, New York, and Texas. They were great because it helped us in, capacity building, and they already dealt with Stafford law and FEMA processes. So, that was very important. And I say this because, like most of the island, lawyers were unemployed after the hurricane. And, we had so many lawyers. We have around 15,000 lawyers in Puerto Rico. And literally, the courts were completely damaged. Some of them were destroyed. One in Bayamon was completely destroyed. So lawyers literally did not have a job. So it was very important for our projects because we actually employed lawyers. It was a low bono employment, but it was employment, and it was important at the time for them. So when folks at different universities or other organizations ask us how can we help as lawyers, it's like you said, it has to be like, maybe not come and take the jobs that we need when you come here, but more assistance. We had some bars and some states that donated to our projects because they recognized and respected the local efforts that were being held in Puerto Rico. So in our projects, we impacted all the municipalities in Puerto Rico, 78 municipalities and 15,000 people. One of the great things about the projects were the partnerships. We had partnerships with universities, the public university, which is the University of Puerto Rico. We had, when I say local governments, I mean the municipalities on a local level. Community leaders, contacting them was extremely helpful. Some people tend to forget how important it is to listen to the people that live there, especially on the most vulnerable and poorest communities in Puerto Rico. We had specific partnerships with the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras, Calle, and Mayagüez. And I would like to mention specifically about Rio Piedras, which is one of the pictures that Kim showed earlier. We had students also in a pro bono program. That law school has a pro bono program for students. They had to comply with 40 hours of pro bono volunteer work every year. It's voluntary, but it's an amazing experience that helps them become another type of lawyer, period. Focus on social justice, community lawyering. And that program was extremely helpful for our projects. They were there, working hands-on, with lawyers on the ground, and it was like a great school for them on the communities. In Calle, we're funding a project that's very important about combining a legal and psychological clinic. It combines both. And it's really important because and I was talking to this earlier before the panel, we had one of our projects in Jabucoa, which was one of my favorite projects. It's a legal emergency project that lawyers went to the people's homes, and it was focused on a 50+ population and elders. And after a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after helping this, I think it was 78-year-old man in Jabucoa, helping them with the application or the appeal on FEMA, a couple of weeks, he committed suicide. And it really, that lawyer just called me crying, and it really, I was really in shock with the news. I knew that there was a mental deterioration on the population in Puerto Rico, but it really struck me to have one of our projects seeing that. So this clinic, this legal and psychological clinics, sort of focuses specifically on that, on combining legal and psychological issues at the same on the same clinic. We had students from Harvard Law School, students from Buffalo helping out. Most of them spoke Spanish. Some of them did not, but they were helped out by Spanish-speaking students. So that was great. To finish this presentation, some of the social and demographic data of our projects, which I think is extremely important to mention. 65% are women, and this is an important number for us at the foundation because it makes visible who are the most in our population who's struggling with issues on housing and on poverty and on legal needs on Puerto Rico. 78% were 50 years or older. Also very important because not necessarily when you need to find legal aid, people 50+ and over are going to go to the FEMA centers or to the universities, and the lawyers have to go to the houses of these people. They have to go to the community and literally have a paper. We didn't have electricity, so we had to go with paper and a pencil, and it was at the beginning very complicated with the legal brigades, but we had to go to the homes. And some homes were in very distant, rural, hard to reach communities, but it was very helpful for this. They don't have transportation, they have health issues, mobility, it's complex. And the majority, almost 80% of our participants are elders. So this is what this is what the legal aid projects are right now in Puerto Rico. Like I mentioned, there was a severe deterioration of mental health. I already mentioned this about all the FEMA applications, and most of them were denied. I'd like to mention this before I finish. People were very tired and felt discriminated. They felt discriminated, but I'm going to reassure that we were discriminated. The way that FEMA handled all the processes, especially with the applications and the appeals, made it very onerous and very difficult for people to access assistance. The guidelines provided alternative documents for ownership, and when we presented them, they were denied. So, and they were in the regulation. So it was like a back and forth. And some people had 4 or 5 appeals, which I think is ridiculous. And they got tired. And they didn't want to appeal FEMA anymore. So I have some observations on other obstacles and recommendations, but I'll leave that for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for getting us kind of place-based here. So what I'd like to do now is, this is the very last slide. So before I move into my questions, are there any burning questions that you all have? Since this is a small group, we want to honor you checking all the way over here and being here. Is there anything that you would like to hear before I turn to our prepared questions? Okay, yes, okay, good.
Just a quick clarifying question. The water co-ops, do they now comply with standards, water quality standards?
Not yet. A lot of them still don't comply, but a lot of progress has been made. through this collaborative, and a lot of the local NGOs have really stepped up to take the lead, to provide technical support, capacity building, and more of them are complying now, and there's more installation of solar. So we still have a long way to go.
And part of the issue for them is paying for the testing, right? Is there any support for them to pay for that?
Yeah, that's another thing that was provided through a lot of the nonprofits involved in that collaborative, the funds to do this, because these communities don't have the money to do it.
Right. Thank you.
It's not a private question, but what you were sharing resonates with what I've learned from Christchurch, New Zealand, after the series of earthquakes. And I'm wondering how these insights can be taken to a more international level, because similar initiatives emerged there, where people needed really legal support, trauma support, and health support in processing the claims, and it was such a bureaucratic process, and even the FEMA equivalent needed training and support to be in a better position to de-escalate the situation. And so it seems that across the globe, people are developing these place-based solutions, and I'm just curious whether you have any ideas about doing some kind of comparison and international learning from other efforts.
I think that is why we're having this conference. I think we do need to have conversations like this. I built the beginnings of what I did on some of the writing that people did, some of that law professors did after Katrina. So I told you that I had the idea. The thing that was very interesting was people who tend to be like me, who are clinical law professors, who are clinics or where second and third year students are practicing law under supervision. We tend to be people who respond and do things. So the people who did this work wrote a draft long paper that they were then going to turn and publish into something, and then they got busy with their other things. And so it's out there, they saved it, but they didn't actually get time to polish it. And so I think that you're asking a couple of years out now for saying, help us again, because I think that part of what happens is we turn, and those of us who are on the ground don't do a collaborative across the board effort. I love that idea.
And prevention lab is kind of, I think it's from the United Nations International Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy.
Yeah.
And they have the prevention lab website where I think the resources would be so appreciated for others who are exactly finding themselves in this situation.
I think that makes sense. Yes, you have one more question.
I have a question, but I also want to comment really fast on her observation and your answer. Definitely super important what we're doing here. I work in Oxfam currently. I was previously with Fundación Fondo de Acceso a la Justicia in Puerto Rico. And if there's something we've seen in Oxfam is that when you do international humanitarian aid after disasters, it has to be in direct partnership with local groups, communities, and organizations. And when Maria happened and Oxfam goes to Puerto Rico, one of the observations that I see, that we see, not we, but because I was not with them back then, but that Oxfam sees is that you have FEMA acting completely different than USAID acts when it goes to respond from a disaster. Like FEMA is this very bureaucratic and very centralized organization that it looks inside only the United States. So it needs to break through that wall, and I think it's a very important role for academics and organizations to make FEMA see that it has to have a more broad view into what even USAID does in other countries. It would have been much better to use that technique in Puerto Rico than the technique that they use. They usually say FEMA does localized, works with local government, but when local governments are just shut down, there's nothing you can do. So that was just an observation about that, which is really important, the work that we're doing here. The question was more about community leaders. I've heard people in this conference say, referring to community leaders in Puerto Rico, that they're like dinosaurs. I've been working with community leaders since I was a law student in Puerto Rico, which I'm not going to say how long ago that was. And yes, they are mostly 50 plus years, mostly women. Some of them are men very set on their ways. And when I say community-based leaders, for the public to understand, is the people that live in the community and have defended their community from everything to subsist. Disaster is just another thing they have to defend the community from. So how were you able, how do you see, because when they categorize community leaders as dinosaurs, what they are saying is that they are not open for change, that they are difficult to work with, that they're going to get extinguished because of their set ways. What observations, people from, I mean, I know Amani, because we talk about this all the time, so she doesn't have to answer me, but the other people.
She knows the answer.
No,
That I'm
well,
listening.
we share about this all the time because it's a point of concern, but the other people that come, from outside, what are your observations about community leadership in Puerto Rico, and how can we, break those barriers that are perceived by the outside collaborators?
I'd love to start off with that. One of the things I wrote down during our keynote address that we just were all at was when she talked about quantum mechanics, and she said, many mutually exclusive views offer valid but partial insight. And I think it's a wonderful metaphor for the work that we're all doing, because to discount anyone in the process risks failure of everything you're trying to do. And especially if you're discounting the people who are living there on the ground who you're supposed to be serving. Putting aside the fact that I take offense at the term dinosaur, because I'm one myself, I think that we need to look at people who have been around a long time as having some wisdom. That doesn't mean they're perfect or that they have all the answers, and it's about this partnership that has to be formed. And so I'll offer one example. There's an organization called, if I'm getting it right, Isla de las Mujeres? Does that ring a bell? Anyone?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So they were involved in the Culebra effort that we had. And they're often some women, elders, and their initial reaction to EPA involvement was, what are you doing in my community? This is my community. It takes time to build trust, and that's the job of the people coming in. It's not the responsibility of the people who live there. And so one of the folks who was involved in that effort from EPA, Terry Wesley, who runs our brownfields program, he said, we were in New York. We have also a Caribbean office and the people there, but we're not on the island. And so it wasn't enough for us to just contact these people when we wanted to get something done, or when we thought there was a need to talk to them. It was necessary for us to call just to connect with these people. And so they went out of their way to build a relationship with people. Because that's what it's about. You can't do anything without trust, and you can't have trust without building relationships. And so, and I also think that, so I think, I'm sorry to hear that people refer to these dinosaurs. It's just a really unfortunate, I didn't know that. But I think the other thing that we need to do is we need to maintain relationships with community leaders when there's not a disaster going on, or when we're not in the midst of a project. And I think that requires, certainly on the federal level, that requires continuity of career service and people who stay within the government and continue to serve the communities that they've been working with for years. So that's a little pitch for how perhaps the federal bureaucracy can help with that sense.
I think a lot of the success of what's been going on in Muthlala has been the leadership that's there and the amount of time that's gone into education and educating community members about what that effort is about, what the expected results are going to be, and how this model differs than the status quo. I think was really super important, and that is been identifying kind of sub-leaders of the community, so making sure that if there's a community leader, let's say from a school, for example, or places where people have gone in the aftermath of Maria, where it's not necessarily your hospital where everybody was going, but maybe your bakery or some other of these community assets that are there, and some of the destinations that people went in terms of seeking some kind of like recovery effort. So going back to the point of understanding what the local needs are and the local insights is the most important. I think that we've learned time and time again that the formula, the one-size-fits-all methods and formulas don't work. That when you're trying to fit into some specific box, you really, you understand on the ground that's not exactly how it works in reality. So yeah, that's been super important, and I think what's needed for that is having one person that's a leader, and this happened to be the executive director of Unidos por Tuado, who had the vision and had military training of knowing how to operationalize teams, I think was also a part of this. But then him identifying other leaders that were going out and understanding how to tap into those other additional networks that aren't necessarily in the hazard disaster plan, but are there that is really the social fabric of what's going on and how things get done. I think a big thing though too is identifying the resources that are needed to fund it and to actually create paid positions for this to be a full-time coordinator role, and that's been some of the efforts that have gone through Unidos por Tuado of hiring staff, because when you're in the aftermath of any kind of trauma, and especially a disaster that takes away a lot of what you have at home, you're not necessarily focused on the needs of the community, and you need to think about what's best for you and your family first. So I think trying to invest the right resources, deploy the right technologies is really important in terms of supporting the community leaders when they're identified.
And I think this is also something that has been very interesting to me as a teacher. So you get students in who are motivated to show up for this kind of community service class. And the first thing they're going to do as they're preparing for class is skim the readings that you give them, because you give them readings in that. And then they're going to go spend a lot of time on their favorite spaces in Google. And so my students came in my first day with a high-level political discussion mode that they wanted to have about what Puerto Rico's history was and what was happening and the governor's position. And that was all good, that was all fine. We had some readings on that because I think it's important to have that context. But then I had to reorient them, and I had to remember, I was a registered lobbyist in DC. I understand that stuff, and I understand the fascination of that stuff. When you've got learners who you're taking out to do service learning, you have to do what didn't happen for me when I was in college, what happened for me when I was a VISTA volunteer right after college, which is I understand that knowing everything there is to know about the Safe Drinking Water Act didn't matter a whit when I was sent to a community church that was really secretly run by this one woman who was the elder in the church, and I had to figure out how to work with her. And so helping the students get that level of cultural competence, get that level of respect, and especially, oh my God, law students think that they're so smart when they're in their second year. And they just want to tell people things because they know a lot, they've paid for it, and they've spent a lot of time. And getting them to shut up and listen is such hard work. It's hard for me, but it's really hard to teach them how to do it. But it's like a really big part of what I have to do, because they can't do what they need to do unless they've practiced listening, unless they're prepared to listen, unless they can do it and do it for a long time and do it over and over again, even when they're tired and frustrated. Yeah, another question before we go to our barrier.
So I'm curious in terms of legal assistance, the extent to which you all have been able to, pivot now into perhaps the criminal realm with issues of protest and all of the things that have been taking place in Puerto Rico around civil rights and that sort of thing. Has that been part of the focus of legal assistance?
You're there.
Yeah.
Far away.
I want to understand your question. Are projects providing legal assistance on civil rights because of protests?
Mm-hmm.
No. We are focused, right now our projects mainly focus on low income and poor communities or vulnerable communities. Specifically, one of our biggest projects is helping people with mortgage foreclosures,
Mm.
which are
Mhm.
very, very, very high right now in Puerto Rico. There's like a crisis right now with that. But we also have different projects in civil legal matters, family law, different types of different civil issues. We still have, instead of FEMA appeals, we are now trying to deal with this new program by the local Department of Housing. It's called R3. It's one of the first programs funded by the CDBGDR funds. It's been quite the project, quite the program. It's giving a lot of headaches, and it's not being managed as it should be by the local Department of Housing. And we have a project, a community lawyering project, and we're seeing people not happy with the process, the initial process of this program. And this program is basically the unmet needs from FEMA to be covered by this program. So this program is really, really important. And we're seeing that initially it's not being managed. So we're trying to focus on that, housing issues. I mean, it would be great to help people with civil rights cases as well, but it's not necessarily the focus of the foundation at this moment.
But that type of case is being worked by other organizations voluntarily, mostly.
Yeah.
Right, there are pro bono lawyers who cover that, but I think that both of our organizations are really focused on the deep access to justice issues of people who are entirely without representation for really basic rights. Not that protesting isn't a basic right, but it's just not where the poverty issues that kind of intersect with what we're doing in our clinics. I'd like to turn now and ask, and I'm going to combine two questions. So I'd like you to each speak just for a few moments. We've got 15 minutes left overall for our panel. And then we'll kind of close with one other quick question that's designed to be only 20 seconds. But I'd like you to talk about and this can be popcorn, it doesn't need to be in a row, the barriers that you see for moving forward in this arena, and any ideas you have either been percolating for a while or that are starting to emerge from this conference of ways to overcome those barriers. So whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, go ahead, you start.
Okay,
this time.
Sure. So again, I'm coming from this more academic space, not necessarily from more the legal aspects of the panel, but at least at University of Buffalo and other sort of research-oriented institutions, I see a major barrier around funding, and this was actually something that was mentioned by you as well. I think, especially if you work with a lot of folks coming from the natural sciences, for example, or engineering, who have a lot of expectations around bringing in funding for their research, oftentimes it's very difficult to get funding for more applied, community-based work, unless you can frame it around some theoretical advancement, or phrase it in a way that you're advancing theoretical knowledge. And so if we're combining the ways to get overcome this, I see some good things happening and moving in the right direction, and we see the National Science Foundation really emphasizing broader impacts of research. We see the convergence, you've heard that mentioned throughout the conference now a few times, an emphasis on different disciplines working together, and this emphasis on sort of campuses and universities reaching beyond its own borders to work with industry and communities and government organizations. So I see the funding organizations starting to change that would then change the way faculty approach research and the way that they're framing the problems and challenges that they're trying to address. But for the most part, a lot of the faculty that I work with are still more in that more traditional realm where they're not really thinking about addressing problems like post-disaster, management and things like that. They're still thinking more in the theoretical, conceptual space. So I see that as a major issue on the academic side. And stemming from that, we see, the incentive structures within our universities as rewarding, a lot of publications and journal articles in science and nature, which are great, that faculty are doing that, or that prestigious in the field, but it doesn't offer the same reward system for the faculty who are doing more of the service learning, the experiential learning, or the applied community-based research.
I think there's two major barriers that I want to touch on. One, the barrier of just evolving politics and policy. As I mentioned, our feasibility study identified the hydropower as a more beneficial way of providing renewable energy to these 3 municipalities. But there's been a lot of, I don't want to say, it's been a slow moving process for the Public-Private Partnership Authority, the P3 authority, to go through a process which will identify qualified teams for actually taking control of these hydro units. So it's kind of a waiting game for the cooperative right now, and I think a barrier to overcome that kind of gridlock or perceived gridlock is building in the adaptive capacity within the organization to identify different pathways. So there's now a bifurcated program now within Unidos por Tualo and the cooperative of, while they're waiting for the hydroelectric units to come online, where they can bid and submit a proposal with probably a few different entities. They have that plan in place, but now they're also doing the solar plus storage at different community centers and looking at residential and other things like that. So they're having this kind of twofold approach. And then I think the other barrier, just as it relates to collaboration with academics, a big challenge for having those true local partners is that it's almost more of an effort on their end than it is on the academic end in some circumstances, where they're putting forth a lot of effort in order for the students to have a good learning experience, and that's the main goal oftentimes of the university. Their primary objective is to have their students have a good course, and that doesn't always align with the needs of the local organization. So I think that barrier of just the nature of the academic year, where you have a ramp-up period where students are trying to learn the context, and then you have some development of a project that happens, and then you hit midterms or a spring break or other things like that. It gets to be pretty tiresome, I think, for our partners on the ground that are trying to provide the information necessary to the students and trying to make their projects go forward while still having their own full-time objectives within just the organization itself. So I think a barrier to overcome that is really intentional schedules that recognize those barriers or those breaks that happen, summer breaks, things like that, and identifying ways to bridge that. So maybe there's a very tangible deliverable that happens at a certain moment, or there's a coordinator on the academic side that is able to bridge those calendar gaps.
So I've identified several obstacles, more just specific, and others are more broad. One of the main obstacles for us with the dealing with the FEMA appeals and going to communities and helping people out with this was that after 9 months of struggling with FEMA denials, we were able, our foundation together with 2 other legal nonprofits in Puerto Rico, we were able to develop this document, this declarative statement document, together with the Office of the Chief Counsel and FEMA. Actually, a very nice FEMA lawyer from that office